They say blood is thicker than water, but for Lisa, blood turned cold as ice when her son departed, and her daughter-in-law threw her out without looking back. After giving every penny and every year of her life to that family, she was discarded like something worthless. At 75, without shelter and without hope, Lisa's only refuge was a school bus forgotten by time, where silence was her only companion. But what no one could predict, and what her daughter-in-law never imagined when she left her to die in misery, is that this bus wasn't just a pile of scrap metal. In the shadows of that cold night, Lisa reached for something that would change not only her destiny, but the lives of everyone who dared underestimate her. Before we reveal this unbelievable twist, join our community and subscribe to the channel. Here we celebrate the strength of those who never give up and the justice that life always brings. Now prepare yourself, because what Lisa found inside that bus changed everything forever. Lisa Thompson had been a widow for 15 years. She'd lost her husband James to a heart attack when she was 60, and though the grief had been crushing, she'd survived it, because she still had her son, David. David had been everything to her after James died, her reason to keep going, her hope for the future, her legacy. When David married Rachel 8 years ago, Lisa had been overjoyed. Rachel was beautiful, ambitious, seemed to adore David. Lisa welcomed her as the daughter she'd never had. 2 years after the wedding, when David and Rachel mentioned they were struggling with the down payment on a house, Lisa didn't hesitate. She sold her own small home, the house she'd lived in with James for 30 years, and gave them the money, every penny. She moved into their spare bedroom, telling herself it was temporary, that she'd find a small apartment once they were settled. But months turned into years, and somehow Lisa never left. She made herself useful, helping with household chores, cooking David's favorite meals, trying to stay out of Rachel's way. She could sense Rachel's growing impatience with her presence, but David always smoothed things over. "Mom, you're family," he'd say. "This is your home too." Then, 2 years ago, David collapsed at work. A brain aneurysm. He was 43 years old. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Lisa's world shattered. She'd already lost her husband. Now she'd lost her only child. The grief was so profound she could barely function. She moved through the house like a ghost, hollow and broken. Rachel grieved too, of course, but Rachel was young, only 38. She had a whole life ahead of her. Lisa was 73, and she felt ancient, like she'd lived 1,000 years too long. The first year after David's death, Rachel tolerated Lisa's presence. They didn't talk much, but they coexisted. Rachel worked long hours at her marketing job. Lisa kept the house clean, made dinners that Rachel rarely ate, tried to stay invisible. But in the second year, things changed. Rachel started going out more, dressing differently, talking about moving forward with her life. Then one evening, Rachel came home with a man. "Lisa, this is Brad," Rachel said, her voice bright and artificial. "We've been seeing each other for a few months. We're getting serious." Brad was younger than Rachel, maybe 35, with slicked back hair and an expensive suit. He barely acknowledged Lisa, looking at her the way you'd look at an old piece of furniture you were planning to get rid of. Over the next weeks, Brad became a fixture in the house. He'd stay over, treat the place like it was his, make comments about the decor being dated and the neighborhood being transitional. And then came the conversation Lisa had been dreading. It was a Sunday morning. Lisa was in the kitchen making breakfast when Rachel and Brad came downstairs, both dressed casually but expensively. Rachel's face was set in that expression Lisa had learned to recognize, the expression that meant she'd made a decision and wasn't interested in discussion. "Lisa, we need to talk," Rachel said, not quite meeting her eyes. Lisa set down the spatula, her heart sinking. "Of course." They sat at the kitchen table, the table Lisa had bought with money from her house sale. "Brad and I are getting married," Rachel announced. "Congratulations," Lisa managed, though the word felt hollow. "We're planning a small ceremony next month, and after that, Brad is moving in, permanently." Lisa nodded slowly, understanding what was coming. "The thing is," Rachel continued, her voice taking on that false sweet tone people use when they're about to be cruel, "Brad and I need space to build our new life together. We're planning to start a family. We'll need the spare bedroom for a nursery. I understand, Lisa said quietly. I've been thinking I should find my own place anyway. Actually, Rachel's voice hardened, we need you out sooner rather than later. By the end of the week. Lisa felt like she'd been slapped. The end of the week? Rachel, that's 4 days. I think we've been more than patient, Rachel said, and now the sweetness was completely gone. You've been living here rent-free for 5 years. David would have wanted you to be independent, to have your own life. The cruelty of using David's name, of pretending this was somehow what he'd want, took Lisa's breath away. Rachel, I gave you the money for this house. I sold my home, and we're grateful for that loan, Rachel interrupted. A loan? Lisa's voice rose despite herself. It wasn't a loan, it was a gift, for you and David. Well, David's gone, Rachel said flatly, and Brad and I need to move forward. I'm sure you understand. Brad finally spoke, his voice cold and businesslike. We've already arranged for a moving service. They'll come on Friday to help you pack and transport your things. Transport them where? Lisa asked. I don't have anywhere to go. Rachel shrugged. That's not really our problem, Lisa. You're a grown woman. You'll figure something out. Maybe contact social services or look into senior housing. Lisa sat stunned, unable to process what was happening. After everything she'd given, after losing her husband and her son, after 5 years of trying to be helpful and unobtrusive, she was being discarded like trash. You're throwing me out, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We're helping you become independent, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. But there wasn't, and they all knew it. The next 4 days were a nightmare. Lisa packed her belongings, what few she had, into 2 suitcases and several boxes. She called her daughter-in-law's bluff and contacted a senior services organization, but the wait list for affordable housing was months long. She had no savings. Every penny had gone to David and Rachel. She had a small social security check each month, but it wasn't enough for first and last month's rent anywhere. She was 75 years old and about to be homeless. On Friday morning, Lisa stood in the foyer with her battered suitcase and a single cardboard box. The box contained photos of James, of David as a child, of their little family. Everything else she was leaving behind. Rachel came downstairs dressed for work, barely glancing at Lisa. Do you have somewhere to go? She asked, more out of obligation than concern. Lisa thought about lying, about saving her dignity, but she was too tired. No. Rachel's expression didn't change. Well, good luck. She opened the front door, a clear dismissal. Lisa picked up her suitcase and box. As she walked past Rachel, she stopped. I loved David more than my own life, she said quietly. I know you did, Rachel replied, her voice oddly gentle for a moment. But he's gone, Lisa, and I have to think about my future now. I hope you understand. Lisa looked at her daughter-in-law, this woman she'd welcomed as a daughter, this woman for whom she'd given up everything. No, Lisa said finally. I don't understand, but I hope someday you do. She walked out into the morning sunshine, and Rachel closed the door behind her. Lisa heard the deadbolt click into place. At 75 years old, with everything she owned in a suitcase and a box, Lisa Thompson was alone in the world. Lisa stood on the sidewalk for a long time, uncertain where to go. She had a few $100s in her checking account, enough for maybe a week in the cheapest motel, if she was careful. But then what? She thought about calling her friend Margaret, but Margaret was in a nursing home now, dealing with her own health problems. Lisa had outlived most of her friends. That's what happened when you got old. Everyone you loved left, one way or another. She started walking, pulling her suitcase behind her, the box awkward in her other arm. She had no destination in mind. She just needed to move, to do something, to not stand frozen on that street corner like a woman who'd been abandoned, which, of course, she had been. As she walked through the familiar neighborhood, the neighborhood she'd helped David and Rachel afford, she found herself thinking about James. Her late husband had been a practical man, a planner. He'd worked as a mechanic, fixing school buses for the county. He'd been good with his hands, good with engines, good at solving problems. What would he do in this situation? The thought stopped her. James, the buses, And suddenly Lisa remembered something she hadn't thought about in years. When James died, he'd left her the house and a small insurance policy, but he'd also left her something else, a piece of land. It wasn't much, just 5 acres of scrubland about 40 miles outside the city, near a tiny town called Milford. The land had been in James's family for generations, inherited from an uncle. They'd driven out to see it once, decades ago. It was remote, undeveloped, accessible only by a dirt road. Nothing on it but brush and one old school bus James had towed there when the county retired it. "Someday we'll put a cabin out here," James had said, "a place to retire to." But they'd never had the money for a cabin, and after James died, Lisa had forgotten about the land entirely. The property taxes were minimal, automatically deducted from her bank account each year, so small she never noticed them. But it was hers, and if that old bus was still there... Lisa changed direction, heading toward the bus station. She had a place to go, after all. It just wasn't a place anyone would call home. The bus ride to Milford took 2 hours and cost $15. The town, when she finally arrived, was barely a town at all. A gas station, a general store, a post office, and a few houses scattered along a rural highway. Lisa asked the store clerk for directions to the old Henderson property. The clerk, a woman in her 50s, looked at Lisa with curiosity but gave her directions. "Nothing out there but brush and rattlesnakes," the woman warned. "You sure that's where you want to go?" "I'm sure," Lisa said. She bought a bottle of water, some crackers, and a flashlight with her dwindling cash. Then she started walking. The dirt road to the property was exactly as she remembered, rutted, overgrown, barely passable. It took her over an hour to walk the 3 miles, pulling her suitcase over rough ground, stopping frequently to rest. At 75, with her arthritis and her bad knee, every step was painful, but she kept going. What choice did she have? When she finally saw the property, her heart sank. It was worse than she'd remembered. The 5 acres were completely overgrown with weeds and brush. Trash had blown in over the years. Plastic bags caught in bushes, old beer cans, debris from who knew where, and there in the middle of it all was the bus. It was a 1970s school bus. Yellow paint faded to a sickly mustard color, rust eating through the metal in places. The windows were mostly intact, but filthy. The tires were flat and rotted. Vines had grown up around the wheels. It looked exactly like what it was, a piece of junk abandoned and forgotten. Lisa stood looking at it, and for the first time since David's death, she laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound, but it was a laugh. This was her inheritance. This was what her life had come to. A 75-year-old woman, thrown away by her family, standing in front of an abandoned bus that would be her home because she had nowhere else to go. The absurdity of it was almost funny. Almost. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the bus. The door was closed but not locked. It took all her strength to pull it open, the hinges screaming in protest. The interior smelled of dust, mildew, and abandonment. The seats were still there, faded green vinyl, cracked and split, stuffing spilling out in places, cobwebs draped between seats like ghosts of curtains. The floor was covered in debris, leaves, dirt, the remains of birds' nests. It was uninhabitable. It was hers. Lisa set down her suitcase and box, then sank onto the driver's seat. The springs groaned under her weight. Through the dirty windshield, she could see the overgrown land stretching out before her, wild and forsaken, just like her. And finally, sitting alone in that ruined bus as the sun began to set, Lisa Thompson allowed herself to cry. She cried for James, dead 15 years. She cried for David, gone too soon. She cried for the life she'd built that had crumbled to nothing. She cried for the home she'd given away and the family that had thrown her away in return. She cried until there were no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted, and so bone-deep tired she could barely move. Then she took a deep breath, dried her eyes, and got to work. She couldn't change what had happened to her, but she could survive. She'd survived losing James. She'd survived losing David. She would survive this too. She found an old broom in the back of the bus. James must have left it there years ago. She swept out the worst of the debris, creating a small clearing on the floor near the front. She opened windows to air out the smell. She spread her jacket on one of the less damaged seats and arranged her few belongings nearby. As darkness fell, she ate her crackers and drank her water. She had no heat, no light except her flashlight, no bathroom, no running water. She had a metal shell and determination. It would have to be enough. That first night, lying across 2 bus seats with her jacket as a blanket, Lisa stared up at the ceiling and made herself a promise. She would not die here. She would not give Rachel and Brad the satisfaction of learning she'd perished alone in this bus. She would survive. She would find a way. She didn't know how yet, but she would. As she finally drifted off to an uncomfortable sleep, her last thought was of James. "Help me," she whispered to his memory. "I don't know what to do. Please help me." In the darkness of the bus there was no answer, but Lisa had learned long ago that sometimes help came from unexpected places. Lisa woke at dawn to the sound of birds and the ache of every joint in her body. Sleeping across bus seats at 75 was nothing like sleeping in a bed. She was stiff, cold, and needed desperately to use a bathroom. She made her way outside behind some bushes and attended to necessities with as much dignity as the situation allowed. The morning was cool but beautiful. The sun rose over the scrubland in shades of pink and gold. Despite everything, Lisa found herself appreciating the quiet, the space, the absence of Rachel's impatient sighs and Brad's dismissive glances. She walked the property, taking stock. There was a tire depression where water collected, maybe from an underground spring. She saw rabbit tracks and bird nests. The land was wild but not dead. Something could be made of this, maybe. Over the next days, Lisa fell into a survival routine. She walked to the general store in Milford every few days for food and water. The clerk, whose name was Betty, started recognizing her. "You really living out at the old Henderson place?" Betty asked one day. "In the bus?" Lisa met her eyes steadily. "I am." "That's rough," Betty said, but there was no pity in her voice. "Just statement of fact. What you need is a camping stove, a water container, and some better supplies." She helped Lisa pick out essentials, giving her a cash discount that Lisa suspected was more charity than business practice, but she was too desperate to refuse. Slowly, the bus became slightly more livable. Lisa cleaned relentlessly, scrubbing seats, washing windows, sweeping daily. She hung an old blanket for privacy. She organized her few possessions. It was still a bus, still abandoned, still desperate, but it was clean. 3 weeks after being thrown out of David and Rachel's house, a storm rolled in. Lisa had been watching the clouds gather all afternoon, knowing she was in trouble. The bus had no real protection from the elements. When the rain started, it was immediate and violent, a summer thunderstorm that turned the sky black and shook the bus with thunder. And then Lisa heard it. Drip, drip, drip. She looked up and saw water coming through the ceiling near the back, a steady stream that was soaking the seat where she'd placed her box of photos. "No!" She scrambled back, grabbing the box, but water was already seeping in. She pulled out the photos frantically, but one, her favorite picture of David as a young boy, the picture she treasured most, was already wet, the image beginning to blur. "No, no, no," Lisa whispered, tears mixing with rain on her face. She had so little left. She couldn't lose this too. She climbed onto the seat, reaching up toward the leak. The ceiling panel was loose, probably had been for years. Water was streaming through a rust hole. She pushed at the panel, trying to position it to deflect the water. It moved, revealing a gap above. And in that gap, illuminated by a flash of lightning, Lisa saw something that didn't belong. A metal box. Her heart pounding, rain still pouring in, Lisa reached into the gap and pulled. The box was heavy, awkward, wedged tight, but she worked it free, pulling it down. It was a steel toolbox, rusty but intact, with a combination lock that had long since corroded away. Lisa climbed down, cradling the box, and moved to the front of the bus where it was drier. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas to protect from moisture, were several items: a leather journal, a manila envelope, and a wooden cigar box. Lisa opened the journal first. James's handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry, my love, I wanted to give you so much more, but I leave you this, hoping it helps. Lisa's vision blurred with tears. The journal continued, explaining in James's careful script. He'd been a collector, coins primarily. Over 30 years he'd bought rare coins whenever he had extra money. Nothing fancy, nothing he thought would make them rich. Just a hobby, something to pass down to David someday. But near the end of the journal his tone changed. I've learned some of these coins are quite valuable. I had them appraised quietly. Lisa, if something happens to me, this collection could support you for years. I've hidden them here, in our land, in the bus, because I don't trust banks. The envelope has documentation. The coins are in the box. Take care of yourself. Take care of David. I love you. Always. James. With trembling hands, Lisa opened the cigar box. Inside, in individual plastic sleeves, were coins. She didn't know much about numismatics, but even she could tell these were special. Old, pristine, carefully maintained. The envelope contained appraisal documents dated a year before James died. Total estimated value, $175,000. Lisa sat in stunned silence as rain pounded on the roof. $175,000. Her husband, dead 15 years, had left her a fortune she never knew existed. The coins might be worth even more now. She started laughing and crying at the same time. James had taken care of her. Even from beyond the grave, even after 15 years, he'd provided for her. Rachel had thrown her away. David was gone. But James, her faithful, loving husband, had made sure she'd be okay. Thank you, Lisa whispered, clutching the journal. Thank you, my love. You always took care of me. Always. That night, despite the storm, despite the leak, despite everything, Lisa slept better than she had in years. She wasn't homeless. She wasn't helpless. She had resources. She had options. And she had a plan forming in her mind. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Lisa traveled back to the city with the cigar box carefully tucked in her bag. She went to a reputable coin dealer, showed the appraisal documents, and had the collection evaluated. The dealer, an older gentleman named Mr. Chen, examined each coin carefully. Mrs. Thompson, he said finally, your husband had an excellent eye. These coins have appreciated significantly. Current market value would be around $240,000. Some pieces are extremely rare. Lisa felt faint. $240,000. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having. I'd like to sell some of them, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Perhaps a third of the collection? Mr. Chen nodded. I can offer you $75,000 for selected pieces, cash today. I'd be interested in purchasing more in the future if you decide to sell. They completed the transaction. Lisa walked out of the shop with a cashier's check for $75,000 and the remaining coins safely stored in a safety deposit box Mr. Chen had helped her arrange. She was no longer a desperate old woman. She was a woman with means, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. First, she opened a new bank account depositing the check. She bought a cheap phone. Then she started researching. Over the next months, Lisa enacted her plan with the careful precision James would have admired. She hired contractors, discreet, professional people who didn't ask unnecessary questions about why a 75-year-old woman wanted to transform a school bus into a luxury tiny home. The transformation was remarkable. The exterior of the bus was sandblasted and repainted, the rust repaired. The interior was completely gutted and rebuilt. Custom cabinetry, a small efficient kitchen, a composting toilet, a shower system, solar panels on the roof for electricity, a water collection and filtration system, hardwood floors, comfortable seating that converted to a bed, climate control, even Wi-Fi. The bus became a tiny house that would make any design magazine proud. But Lisa didn't stop there. She had the land cleared professionally, removing trash and overgrowth. She had a well drilled. She planted gardens, vegetables and flowers. She had a small greenhouse built. She installed a fire pit and outdoor seating. The 5 acres transformed from wasteland to oasis. She spent $40,000 total, a significant sum, but she still had $35,000 in the bank and more coins to sell if needed. And the Social Security check that had seemed impossibly small now covered her modest monthly expenses easily. Lisa also took care of herself. She bought new clothes. She started eating well, fresh food from her garden and the store. She walked the property daily, regaining strength and health. Her hair, which had gone grey and thin from stress, she let grow natural, wearing it in a soft silver style that suited her. She looked, she realized one day, looking in a small mirror, like herself again, not the anxious, diminished woman who'd tried to stay invisible in Rachel's house, but the Lisa she'd been before, strong, capable, content. The transformation took 6 months. By the time spring arrived, the school bus was unrecognizable. From the outside, it looked artistic, intentional, a statement piece rather than a desperate shelter. The property looked like a small homestead, productive and peaceful, and Lisa felt more at peace than she had in years. She'd also, somewhat accidentally, become a local character. People driving the rural roads would slow down to look at the bus house. A local blogger had featured her property in a post about creative tiny homes. A few people had even stopped by to ask questions, admiring her setup. Lisa, who'd spent so long trying to be invisible, found herself becoming visible again, but on her own terms. She shared her story carefully, leaving out the cruelty of Rachel's rejection, but emphasizing the idea of reinvention, of turning necessity into opportunity. People responded to that story, especially older people, especially women, who saw themselves in her narrative. "You're an inspiration," one woman told her, a 70-year-old named Dorothy who'd stopped by after reading the blog. "I'm going through a divorce and thought my life was over, but you've shown me it's not." Lisa had smiled. "It's never over until we decide it's over. As long as we're breathing, we can rebuild." That conversation led to another, and then another. Women started visiting, women dealing with divorce, widowhood, abandonment by adult children. Lisa found herself offering advice, encouragement, sometimes just a listening ear and a cup of tea. Her 5 acres became an unexpected refuge for women who needed to remember their worth. And through it all, Lisa never contacted Rachel, never sent a message or made a call. She disappeared from Rachel's life as completely as Rachel had erased her. It was, Lisa thought, the best form of dignity. Let Rachel think what she wanted. Lisa had moved on. But karma, it turned out, had its own schedule. What Lisa didn't know as she built her new life in peaceful obscurity was that Rachel and Brad's perfect life was crumbling. It started small. Brad's guaranteed business venture, the reason he'd been so confident about starting a family and merging his life with Rachel's, failed spectacularly. He'd invested heavily in a restaurant partnership that collapsed within 6 months. Suddenly, Brad wasn't the successful entrepreneur with endless resources. He was a man with massive debt and no income. Rachel, who'd been planning to cut back her hours to start a family, found herself working overtime to cover their mortgage. The house payment, the house Lisa had made possible, was crushing. Then Brad's ex-wife surfaced with a lawsuit over unpaid alimony. Legal fees piled up, credit cards maxed out. The luxury lifestyle they'd projected proved to be mostly projection. Brad started drinking. Their marriage, barely a year old, began showing cracks. They fought about money, about his ex-wife, about their future. When Rachel suggested selling the house to relieve financial pressure, Brad exploded. "This is your house," he shouted. "From your previous marriage, you figure it out." "It's our house," Rachel shot back. "We're married." "Then where's your rich dead husband's money? You said there was inheritance." There had been some life insurance, but Rachel had spent it. On the wedding, on furniture, on maintaining appearances. She'd assumed Brad's income would sustain them. That assumption had been wrong. As bills mounted and the bank threatened foreclosure, Rachel found herself thinking about Lisa. Not with fondness or regret. Rachel didn't do regret, but with calculation. What had happened to the old woman? Rachel had assumed Lisa ended up in some city shelter or budget care facility. She'd felt a twinge of guilt initially, but had suppressed it. Lisa wasn't her responsibility. David had been Rachel's husband, not his mother. But now, desperate, Rachel wondered if Lisa might have resources Rachel didn't know about. Maybe she'd ended up with relatives who had money. Maybe there was something left from the old house sale that could be reclaimed. Maybe Lisa had died and there was an estate. It was a long shot, but Rachel was out of options. She started searching online. Lisa Thompson wasn't a common name, but it wasn't rare either. Rachel searched for obituaries first. Nothing. Then she expanded her search, adding elderly and housing and various other terms. For weeks she found nothing. Then, scrolling through a regional blog about creative tiny houses and sustainable living, Rachel saw a photo that made her stop breathing. It was the school bus, but not as Rachel would have remembered it, if she'd even known it existed. This bus was beautiful, transformed, surrounded by gardens and a lovingly tended homestead. And standing beside it, wearing practical clothes and a serene smile, was Lisa. The caption read, "Local resident Lisa Thompson, 75, has transformed her late husband's property into a stunning example of tiny house living and sustainable agriculture." Her story of reinvention after loss has inspired many in our community. Rachel read the article with growing shock. It mentioned Lisa's transformation, her gardens, the solar power system, the way she'd turned an abandoned bus into a dream home. It mentioned the small community of women who'd found support and friendship through visiting Lisa's property. It mentioned, though not in detail, that Lisa had resources from her late husband that enabled the transformation. Resources. Rachel's mind raced. What resources? Lisa had been broke. Lisa had owned nothing. Unless... Rachel searched further, finding a few more mentions. A local news piece about creative retirement solutions. A sustainability blog about off-grid living. Each one featured Lisa looking healthy, happy and distinctly not destitute. Rachel's initial shock transformed into something uglier. Rage. That ungrateful old woman had been hiding money. Had let Rachel think she was doing Lisa a favor by taking her in. Had played the victim while secretly having resources. That manipulative bitch, Rachel breathed. Brad looked up from his laptop where he was job searching. What? My former mother-in-law. She's been living in luxury while we're drowning in debt. Rachel showed Brad the articles. His eyes narrowed. Where exactly is this bus? Rachel checked the blog post. The location wasn't specific, but it mentioned Milford, a tiny town 40 miles out. We should visit her, Brad said carefully. If she has money and we're David's wife, widow, Rachel corrected. You're David's widow. That creates certain legal connections. If she has assets from David's father, you might have a claim. It was flimsy legal logic at best, but Rachel didn't care about logic. She was desperate, angry, and looking for any way out of the hole she'd dug. I'll call her, Rachel decided. But she had no number for Lisa. The old woman had vanished without a trace. Then we show up, Brad said. In person. Hard to ignore someone standing at your door. Rachel nodded slowly. She'd thrown Lisa out without mercy. Now she'd show up acting concerned, pretending she'd been worried, trying to reconnect. It was manipulative and hypocritical. But Rachel's pride had long since been beaten down by overdue bills and foreclosure notices. She'd do what she had to do, even if it meant crawling back to the woman she'd discarded. On a sunny Saturday morning 2 weeks later, Rachel and Brad pulled up to Lisa's property in their car, a luxury SUV they could no longer afford but maintained for appearances. They'd asked around in Milford for directions to the bus house, and several people had pointed them out here. The transformation of the property was immediately visible. Where Rachel had expected wasteland and a rusted hulk, she found a small homestead that looked like something from a magazine. Gardens bursting with vegetables and flowers, a neat gravel path, solar panels glinting in the sun, and the bus itself, gleaming, artistic, beautiful. Rachel felt a spike of irrational anger. This should have been hers. If Lisa had money, Rachel should have gotten it. She'd taken care of the old woman for years. She deserved this more than Lisa did. They parked and approached. The bus door was open, and through it Rachel could hear voices, women's voices, laughing. She climbed the steps and knocked on the frame. "Hello?" The laughter stopped. A moment later, Lisa appeared in the doorway. She looked different, healthy, confident. She wore jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her silver hair was styled. She looked like someone who'd found peace. When Lisa saw Rachel, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear, no anger. Just calm recognition. "Rachel," Lisa said evenly. "This is unexpected." "Hi, Lisa. Brad and I were in the area, and I heard you were living out here. I wanted to check on you, make sure you were okay." Lisa's expression suggested she didn't believe a word of that, but her voice remained polite. "I'm doing very well, thank you, as you can see." Rachel glanced past Lisa into the bus. The interior was stunning. Wooden floors, custom cabinets, a small but beautiful living space. 3 other women were visible inside, all around Lisa's age, all looking at Rachel with expressions ranging from curiosity to something less friendly. "I didn't realize you had company," Rachel said, wrong-footed. "I host a weekly gathering," Lisa explained. "Women supporting women. We were just having tea." The words were pointed. Rachel had never once invited Lisa to a gathering, never once treated her as someone worth supporting. "Could we talk?" Rachel asked. "Privately?" Lisa considered this, then nodded. "Of course. Let me just excuse myself." She went back inside briefly, then emerged, closing the door behind her. She walked to the outdoor seating area, comfortable chairs around a fire pit, and gestured for Rachel and Brad to sit. They did. Lisa remained standing, a subtle power play. "So," Lisa said, "what brings you here after 18 months of silence?" Rachel had prepared a speech about missing Lisa, about being concerned, about wanting to reconnect. But faced with Lisa's direct gaze, the words died. "I saw the articles," she admitted. "About your place here, about your transformation." "Ah," Lisa's voice was understanding. "And you wondered how I afforded it." "Lisa, when you left our house, you had nothing. When you threw me out," Lisa corrected gently. "Let's be accurate about what happened." Rachel flushed. "When we agreed it was time for you to be independent, I thought you were destitute. But clearly you had resources. If I'd known, you would have what?" Lisa's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. "Let me stay, or try to take those resources from me? That's not fair, isn't it?" Lisa sat down now, folding her hands in her lap. "Rachel, you threw me out 4 days after telling me. You knew I had no money, no place to go. You watched me leave with a suitcase and a box of photos. You closed the door. You didn't call to check if I'd survived. For 18 months you've had no contact with me, and now you show up because you've seen I'm not living in a gutter somewhere. So I'll ask again, what do you want?" Brad leaned forward. "We're struggling financially. The house is in foreclosure. Rachel's your daughter-in-law. We thought maybe you could help." Family should help family. The irony of that statement hung in the air. Lisa actually smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Family should help family," she repeated. "How interesting. Tell me, Brad, were you thinking about family when you moved into my son's house and immediately began planning how to remove me from it?" "Lisa, we made mistakes," Rachel said quickly. "I made mistakes. I was grieving and overwhelmed, and I handled things badly. I'm sorry. I truly am. But we're desperate now. If you have money from James from the old days, maybe you could loan us something. We'll pay you back." "Loan you money," Lisa said softly. "The way I loaned you the money for that house. The money you never paid back, never acknowledged, never thanked me for." "Mum," Rachel caught herself. She'd stopped calling Lisa Mum months before throwing her out. The word now sounded false. Lisa stood up. "Let me tell you what happened after you threw me out, Rachel. I came to this property with nowhere else to go. I slept in that bus when it was just a rusted shell. I had no heat, no water, no bathroom. I was 75 years old and homeless because of your cruelty. I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd die out here and no one would even notice." Rachel had the grace to look down. "But I survived. And yes, I found resources. James, my husband, the man I loved for 33 years, left me a small treasure. Not much, but enough. Enough to fix this place. Enough to live with dignity. He took care of me even after death. That's what real love looks like, Rachel. It protects, it provides, it doesn't throw away. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. Are you? Or are you sorry you're broke and I'm not? Lisa's voice was firm but not angry. You made your choice 18 months ago. You decided I had no value, no worth, nothing to contribute. You were wrong, but more importantly, you showed me exactly who you are. And I believe people when they show me who they are. So you won't help us. It wasn't a question. I won't enable you, Lisa corrected. There's a difference. Rachel, you're young. You're capable. You made bad choices. Marrying Brad quickly. Spending money you didn't have. Living beyond your means. Those are fixable problems. Sell the house. Downsize. Get real jobs. Live within your means. Rebuild. I did it at 75. You can do it at 40. After everything I did for you, everything you did for me. Lisa's composure finally cracked slightly. Everything I did for you, you mean? I gave you my home. I gave you every penny I had. I gave you 5 years of cooking and cleaning and trying to stay out of your way. And you repaid me by throwing me out with 4 days' notice. So no, Rachel, I don't owe you anything. Not money, not help, not even my anger. I'm done with you. Rachel stood up, her own anger finally surfacing. Fine. We'll manage without you. But don't expect me to come around when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. You'll die alone in this bus. Lisa smiled sadly. Rachel, I'd rather die alone with dignity than live as someone's burden. I learned that from you. Now please leave. My friends are waiting. Rachel and Brad left, getting into their too expensive car, driving away angry and empty-handed. Lisa watched them go, then turned back to the bus. The 3 women inside had watched through the window. Are you okay? One of them asked as Lisa came back in. I'm perfect, Lisa said honestly. And she was. She'd faced her demons. She'd stood her ground. She'd refused to be used or manipulated. She'd chosen herself. That night, after her friends had left, Lisa sat in the driver's seat of the bus, her favorite spot, where she could look out at the property and watch the sunset. She thought about David, about how proud he would be of her. She thought about James, whose love and planning had saved her. She thought about Rachel, who would probably never understand the gift she'd given Lisa by throwing her out, because the truth was, being discarded had freed Lisa. It had forced her to discover her own strength, to build her own life, to stop being someone's convenient helper and become her own person. At 75, she'd been reborn. She pulled out her phone and opened the simple website she'd created for her informal support group of older women. She posted a new update. Today, I was visited by someone from my past who wanted to use me again. I said no. Saying no is powerful. Saying no protects your peace. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your life, your resources, or your energy just because they demand it. Your worth isn't determined by your usefulness to people who don't value you. Your worth is inherent. Never forget that. The post got responses within minutes from women who understood, who'd learned the same lesson, who were still learning it. Lisa smiled and closed the phone. Tomorrow she'd work in her garden. She'd host her weekly gathering. She'd live her quiet, peaceful, chosen life. Rachel and Brad could learn their own lessons. Lisa was done teaching. 6 months after Rachel's visit, Lisa's property had become something unexpected, a small sanctuary, known locally as the Refuge. Word had spread through networks of older women, through churches and community centers, through word of mouth. Women dealing with late-life divorce, widowhood, abandonment by adult children, financial hardship. They came to visit, to see Lisa's transformation, to find hope for their own situations. Lisa hadn't planned to become a counselor or a leader, but she found herself naturally falling into the role. She'd learned hard lessons about resilience and worth. Sharing those lessons felt right. She held weekly gatherings in her outdoor space. Sometimes 10 women came, sometimes just 2. They'd sit around the fire pit, drink tea, share stories, support each other. Lisa talked about her journey, the marriage to James, the widowhood, David's death, Rachel's betrayal, the terrifying months in the bus before she found the coins, the decision to rebuild rather than despair. But she also listened. She listened to Martha, 72, whose children had put her in a nursing home and sold her house without asking. She listened to Joan, 68, whose husband of 40 years left her for a younger woman and emptied their bank accounts. She listened to Patricia, 75, whose daughter-in-law, like Rachel, had systematically erased her from family life until she felt invisible. These women needed to be heard. They needed to know they weren't alone, and Lisa could give them that. She also gave practical advice: how to live frugally, how to access senior services, how to find dignity in small spaces, how to rebuild when you thought you had nothing left. The refuge started getting media attention, not major networks, but local news, blogs, a few regional magazines. They called Lisa inspiring. They called her a symbol of resilience. She found it all slightly absurd. She was just an old woman who'd survived because she had no other choice. But if her story helped others, she'd share it. The property grew too. Lisa expanded the gardens. She added a small cabin using money from selling another portion of her coin collection, a space where women in crisis could stay for a few weeks while they got on their feet. She employed a part-time helper, a woman named Ruth who'd lost her husband and needed income and purpose. The 5 acres became a working homestead, productive and peaceful. Lisa herself had never been healthier. The physical work, the good food from her garden, the purpose, the community, all of it combined to give her a vitality she hadn't felt in decades. At 76, she was stronger than she'd been at 65. Her doctor was amazed. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he told her. "You're thriving." She was. She truly was. Then, on a fall day, nearly 2 years after she'd thrown Rachel out of her property, Lisa received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She got spam calls occasionally, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Lisa, it's Rachel." The voice was small, chastened, very different from the angry woman who'd left Lisa's property months ago. Lisa's heart didn't race. She felt calm. "Hello, Rachel. I need to tell you something. Brad and I are divorced. The house was foreclosed. I'm living in a small apartment and working 2 jobs. It's hard. It's really hard." "I'm sorry to hear you're struggling," Lisa said, and meant it. She didn't wish suffering on anyone. "I called because I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. I've had time to think about what I did to you. How cruel I was. How selfish. I threw you out without care or compassion. I don't have an excuse. I was wrong." Lisa sat down. "This was unexpected. Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know I saw the articles about the refuge, about what you've built. You're helping people. You're making a difference. David would be so proud of you. I know I have no right to say this, but I'm proud of you too." Lisa felt tears prick her eyes. "That means more than you know. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. And I'm glad you're okay, more than okay. You're amazing." They talked for a few more minutes. Rachel didn't ask for help, didn't hint at needing money. She just apologized sincerely and told Lisa she was working on becoming a better person. When they hung up, Lisa sat for a long time, thinking. Rachel's apology didn't undo the harm, didn't erase the terror and pain of those first months in the bus, but it was something. It was acknowledgement, it was growth. Maybe Rachel would become who she was meant to be. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't Lisa's responsibility. Lisa had her own life now, her own purpose, her own peace. That evening at the weekly gathering, Lisa shared the story of Rachel's call with the women who'd become her community. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the people who hurt us do eventually understand what they did. Sometimes they grow. Sometimes they apologize. And when that happens, we have a choice. We can hold on to anger, or we can accept the apology and move forward. Not necessarily with reconciliation, not necessarily with renewed relationship, but with understanding that people are complex, that growth is possible, that forgiveness benefits us more than it benefits them. Would you help her if she asked? one woman asked. Lisa thought about it. I don't know. Maybe. On my terms. With boundaries. But she didn't ask, she just apologized, and that's enough. The women nodded, understanding. Many of them were wrestling with similar questions about people who'd hurt them. As the sun set, and the women gradually departed, Lisa stood on her property looking at what she'd built. The bus, transformed from desperate shelter to beautiful home. The gardens, lush and productive. The small cabin where women found temporary refuge. The community of survivors who'd found each other. This was her legacy. Not the marriage to James, though that had been good. Not the years raising David, though she'd loved that. Not even the coins James left, though they'd saved her. Her legacy was this, showing other women that it was never too late to rebuild, that being discarded wasn't the same as being worthless, that endings could be beginnings if you had courage and refused to give up. At 76 years old, Lisa Thompson had found her purpose, and it was magnificent. She sat in the driver's seat of her bus, her favorite spot, the place where she'd first wept in despair and now sat in contentment. Through the windshield, she could see the property stretching out before her, alive with possibility. "Thank you, James," she whispered to her late husband. "Thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for making this possible." And thank you, she thought, but didn't say to Rachel, because as twisted as it was, Rachel's cruelty had forced Lisa to discover her own strength, had pushed her toward this life she never would have chosen, but now cherished. Sometimes blessings came disguised as catastrophes. Sometimes being thrown away was actually being set free. Lisa had learned that, and now she'd spend the rest of her days teaching it to others. The blood hadn't been thicker than water, but love, real love, transcended death, and strength, real strength, came from within. Lisa had found both, and she would never let anyone take them from her again. Lisa's final year brought unexpected honors. The refuge was featured in a national magazine article about innovative solutions for older women facing housing insecurity. The governor of the state visited, praising Lisa's work and announcing a small grant program modeled on her approach. A university asked her to speak to their gerontology students. Lisa, who'd spent so many years trying to be invisible, was suddenly visible in ways she'd never imagined. But she remained grounded. She still wore jeans and practical sweaters. She still worked in her garden every day. She still hosted weekly gatherings for women who needed support. Fame was fleeting and silly. The work was what mattered. On her 77th birthday, surrounded by the community she'd built, Lisa made a speech. "When I was 75, I thought my life was over. I'd lost everyone I loved. I was thrown away by the one family member I had left. I ended up in that bus behind me, which was then just a rusted shell, sleeping on torn seats and wondering if I'd survive the week. If someone had told me then that 2 years later I'd be standing here, healthy and happy, surrounded by amazing women, living a life of purpose and peace, I wouldn't have believed them. But here I am, and here you are, and I've learned something important. We are not defined by what happens to us. We're defined by how we respond to what happens to us. Rachel threw me away, but I chose not to stay in the trash heap. I chose to rebuild. James left me resources, but I chose how to use them. I could have spent that money on revenge or bitterness. I chose community instead, and that choice has given me more joy than revenge ever could. So my message to all of you, especially those of you dealing with abandonment or loss, or the feeling that your best years are behind you, they're not. Your best years are the ones where you're living authentically, where you're choosing your own path, where you're surrounded by people who actually value you.